The morning sun filtered through the towering oaks of Jefferson Park, painting the paths with dappled light. The park, usually alive with joggers and families, was eerily quiet. A large section had been roped off with bright yellow signs declaring, "No entry, authorized personnel only." Tomorrow, this peaceful space would host a large-scale military exercise, and preparations were well underway. Colonel Vanessa Reynolds moved through the restricted area with purpose. Though off-duty attire replaced her usual uniform, Vanessa's posture and focused demeanor made her authority unmistakable. She'd served 22 years in the U.S. Army, facing challenges on and off the battlefield. Today's task was routine, double-checking locations for the exercise and ensuring everything was up to military standards. Vanessa glanced at the notes on her phone, her steps deliberate as she mapped the designated points. The soft hum of nature surrounded her, but she remained on high alert, a habit honed over years of service. As she adjusted her route, her attention shifted to a figure in the distance, a uniformed police officer patrolling near the restricted area's edge. Officer Charlie Edwards had been with the Jefferson Police Department for nearly 2 decades. Known for his no-nonsense approach, Charlie prided himself on enforcing rules. His sharp gaze often scanned for anything, or anyone, out of place. Today, his routine patrol led him to the restricted zone, where Vanessa's presence caught his attention immediately. Charlie's instincts kicked in. A civilian walking alone in an area clearly marked off limits? It didn't sit right with him. He approached with long, deliberate strides, his hand resting casually near his holster. As he drew closer, he called out, his voice sharp and commanding, "Hey! You there! Stop right now!" Vanessa stopped in her tracks, turning to face the voice. She exhaled quietly, already sensing where this encounter might lead. Encounters like these were far too familiar. She'd learned to navigate them with calm professionalism, though they always tested her patience. "Yes, officer?" Vanessa said, her tone measured but firm. Charlie closed the distance, his boots crunching against the gravel. "This area is off limits," he said, gesturing toward the signs behind her. "Didn't you see the markers? You're trespassing." Vanessa nodded once, her voice steady. "I'm aware of the restrictions. I'm here on official business." Charlie raised an eyebrow, his skepticism evident. "Official business? In jeans and a t-shirt? What are you, a contractor? Or just lost?" The insinuation hung in the air, and Vanessa felt her patience waver. Still, she kept her tone professional. "I am Colonel Vanessa Reynolds with the United States Army. I am inspecting this area in preparation for tomorrow's exercise. Here is my identification." She retrieved her military ID, extending it for Charlie to review. He barely glanced at it before crossing his arms. "Colonel, huh?" he said, his voice thick with disbelief. "I've seen plenty of people with fake IDs. You don't look like any soldier I've ever met." Vanessa's jaw tightened, but she refused to engage in his condescension. "Officer Edwards, you are welcome to verify my credentials with your precinct or the city's leadership. I have every right to be here." But Charlie wasn't interested in verifying anything. "Look, lady," he said, his tone growing sharper, "I don't care what story you've cooked up. This is a restricted area and you're trespassing. Leave now or I'll arrest you." Vanessa took a step forward, her stance firm. "I strongly suggest you reconsider your tone and actions, officer. You are overstepping your authority." Charlie smirked, misinterpreting her composure as defiance. "Oh, I see how it is. You think you're above the rules, don't you? Well, I don't care who you claim to be. You're leaving." Vanessa remained calm on the surface, but inside, her instincts were on high alert. She met Charlie's gaze directly. "Officer, I suggest you call your superior. This situation does not need to escalate." Charlie's expression hardened, his hand inching closer to his belt. "You think I need someone to tell me how to do my job? I've dealt with enough people like you to know your type." Vanessa's stomach churned, but she stood her ground. This was far from over. Vanessa stood firm, her gaze steady as Officer Edwards loomed closer, his posture rigid with misplaced authority. She had seen this type of behavior before, men who mistook their uniform for unchecked power. She stayed calm, but her mind was racing. The situation could spiral quickly, and she needed to control it before that happened. "Officer Edwards," Vanessa began, her voice measured but authoritative, "I am here on official military duty. If you refuse to verify my credentials, I suggest you step aside and let me proceed." But Charlie wasn't backing down. He squared his shoulders, his hand resting on his belt as if to emphasize his authority. "Listen, lady," he spat, his tone dripping with disdain. "You don't get to tell me how to do my job. This is my jurisdiction, and you're the one breaking the rules. So I'll say it one more time. Turn around and leave before I take you in." Vanessa felt her patience wearing thin. Years of military discipline kept her composed, but the disrespect was grating. She had spent over 2 decades serving her country, facing challenges far greater than an overzealous local cop. But this moment felt particularly offensive. "Officer, I'm warning you," she said, her tone sharpening. "You're acting outside your authority. If you continue, I will file a formal complaint and escalate this matter through proper channels." Charlie smirked, stepping even closer. His arrogance was palpable, fueled by the mistaken belief that he was untouchable in this small interaction. "Oh, so now you're threatening me? Go ahead, Colonel," he said mockingly, placing heavy emphasis on her title as if it were a joke. "Let's see how far you get." Vanessa inhaled deeply, resisting the urge to snap back. Instead, she reached for her phone, deliberately moving slowly to avoid escalating the situation further. "I'm calling someone who can clear this up," she said, scrolling through her contacts. Charlie's eyes narrowed, his hand moving instinctively toward his firearm. "Put that phone away," he barked, his voice louder now, echoing through the quiet park. Vanessa froze, her hand still hovering over the screen. She raised her eyes to meet his, her voice calm but firm. "Officer Edwards, you need to think very carefully about your next move." But Charlie wasn't thinking. His emotions were driving him now. Pride, insecurity, and a deep-seated bias that clouded his judgment. "I'm done playing games," he said, pulling his gun from its holster and pointing it directly at Vanessa. The world seemed to pause. Vanessa felt her pulse quicken, but she maintained her composure. Years of military training kicked in, allowing her to think clearly even as the situation turned dangerous. Her gaze locked onto Charlie, her voice steady and low. "Officer, you are making a serious mistake," she said. "I am unarmed, and I pose no threat to you. Lower your weapon before this goes too far." Charlie's grip on the gun wavered, but his face remained defiant. "You don't get it, do you?" he growled. "You don't belong here. You're not above the law." Vanessa didn't flinch. She knew she needed to de-escalate, but she also recognized the risk of making any sudden moves. Slowly, she raised her phone again. "I'm calling the mayor," she said, her tone firm but non-confrontational. "He'll confirm my authority here." Charlie hesitated, his confidence cracking slightly. "The mayor?" he scoffed, though his voice lacked the certainty it had moments before. "Yes," Vanessa replied, dialing the number. "And if you're smart, you'll put that gun away before he arrives." The phone rang twice before a deep voice answered. "This is Mayor Walker." "Mayor Walker, this is Colonel Vanessa Reynolds," Vanessa said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I'm in Jefferson Park, and I need your immediate assistance. An officer is refusing to acknowledge my authority and has drawn his weapon on me." There was a brief silence on the other end before the mayor replied, his tone sharp. "I'll be there in 5 minutes. Stay where you are, Colonel." Vanessa ended the call and returned her gaze to Charlie. "The mayor's on his way," she said. "You still have a chance to de-escalate this before it gets worse." But Charlie didn't lower his weapon. His hands trembled slightly, betraying the fear behind his bravado. The tension hung heavy in the air, each second stretching into an eternity. Vanessa stood still, her expression calm but resolute. She knew this wasn't over yet, but she had one clear advantage. She wasn't the one losing control. The sound of a car engine broke the suffocating silence. A sleek black sedan pulled up just beyond the barriers, its presence cutting through the tension like a blade. Mayor Jonathan Walker stepped out, his tall frame exuding authority. His expression was a mix of concern and frustration as he surveyed the scene. A police officer holding a gun on a woman who stood unwavering, her stance calm and confident. "Colonel Reynolds," the mayor called out, striding toward her with purpose. "Are you all right?" Vanessa turned slightly, her composure intact. "I'm fine, sir. Thank you for coming so quickly." Mayor Walker's sharp gaze shifted to Officer Edwards, who had yet to lower his weapon. "Officer, put the gun down, now." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. Charlie hesitated, the authority in the mayor's tone shaking his already fragile confidence. Slowly, he lowered the gun, his hands trembling as he holstered it. "Mr. Mayor, I was just—" "Enough," Walker interrupted, his voice cold. "I don't want to hear your excuses right now." He turned to Vanessa. "Colonel, please tell me what happened here." Vanessa recounted the events succinctly, her tone steady. "I was inspecting the area for tomorrow's military exercise, as per my assignment. Officer Edwards approached me, accused me of trespassing, and refused to verify my credentials. When I tried to explain, he escalated the situation by drawing his weapon on me." Walker nodded, his expression darkening with every word. He turned back to Charlie, his jaw tight. "Is this true, Officer Edwards?" Charlie fumbled for words, his earlier bravado now replaced by nervousness. I thought she was trespassing, sir. She wasn't in uniform, and I didn't know who she was." The mayor's voice was sharp. "So instead of verifying her identity, you decided to pull a gun on her? Is that how we operate in this city?" Charlie stammered. I was just doing my job. I thought she might be dangerous." Walker's eyes narrowed. "Dangerous? She was unarmed, standing in plain sight, and offered you her identification. You ignored every protocol and let your personal bias cloud your judgment." The weight of the mayor's words seemed to press down on Charlie. He stood stiffly, his face pale. Walker addressed Vanessa again. "Colonel Reynolds, on behalf of the city, I deeply apologize for what you've had to endure. This kind of behavior is unacceptable and will not go unaddressed." "Thank you, sir," Vanessa replied, her professionalism unshaken. "I trust that appropriate measures will be taken." Walker turned to Charlie, his tone final. "Hand over your weapon and badge. You're suspended, effective immediately, pending an internal investigation." Charlie froze, disbelief flashing across his face. "But sir, I was just—" "Enough," Walker snapped. "You've embarrassed yourself and this department. If I hear another word from you, it'll be worse." Reluctantly, Charlie unclipped his badge and removed his holstered gun, handing them over with a stiff, shaking hand. He avoided looking at Vanessa, shame and anger battling for dominance in his expression. As Charlie turned to leave, Walker addressed him one last time. "You're to report to the precinct tomorrow morning for a full review. I suggest you start preparing your defense, though I doubt it'll help." With that, Charlie trudged away, his shoulders slumped, leaving Vanessa and the mayor alone in the clearing. Walker sighed heavily, rubbing his temple. "Colonel, this shouldn't have happened. I'm sorry that it did." Vanessa nodded. "I appreciate your swift response, Mayor, but this isn't just about me. Incidents like this point to a larger issue: systemic bias and a lack of proper training. I hope you'll consider addressing that as well." The mayor nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right. We need to ensure this doesn't happen again, to anyone." As the conversation wrapped up, Vanessa glanced back at the now empty pathway where Charlie had stood. Despite her relief at the resolution, the encounter lingered in her mind. She had faced countless challenges in her military career, but the battle against prejudice was one of the hardest and most personal she had ever fought. The next morning, the Jefferson Police Department held an internal meeting, its atmosphere heavy with tension. Officer Charlie Edwards sat stiffly at a long table, flanked by members of an internal investigation team. On the other side sat Chief Martha Grayson, a no-nonsense leader with decades of experience, and Mayor Walker, who had insisted on overseeing the proceedings personally. Charlie fidgeted as a video from his body camera played on a large screen. The footage captured the entire incident in damning detail: his dismissive tone, his refusal to check Vanessa's credentials, and the moment he drew his weapon. When the video ended, Chief Grayson let out a long sigh, her disappointment evident. "Officer Edwards," she began, her voice calm but firm, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" Charlie cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. I thought she was trespassing. She wasn't in uniform, and she didn't look like a colonel. I was just trying to do my job." Grayson's eyes narrowed. "Your job is to serve and protect, not to escalate a situation because of your assumptions. She showed you her ID. She told you who she was. You ignored protocol and made her feel like a criminal in the process. Do you understand how serious this is?" Charlie lowered his gaze, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. I wasn't trying to. Intent doesn't erase impact, Mayor Walker interrupted, his voice sharp. You not only endangered an innocent person, but you also undermined the public's trust in law enforcement. How do you think this reflects on the department? Charlie had no answer. After a pause, Grayson continued. Effective immediately, you are terminated from your position for violating department protocol, displaying unprofessional conduct, and abusing your authority. The room fell silent. Charlie looked down, the gravity of his dismissal washing over him. He had never imagined his career would end like this. Meanwhile, across town, Vanessa prepared for a press conference organized by the military in the city. Dressed sharply in her uniform, she stood at the podium before a crowd of reporters, cameras clicking incessantly. Good afternoon, Vanessa began, her voice calm but resolute. Yesterday's incident was not just about a misunderstanding between two individuals. It was a reflection of broader issues, bias, prejudice, and a failure to uphold the principles of justice. She took a moment to look at the crowd, her words measured. As a colonel in the United States Army, I've dedicated my life to serving this country. I've faced many challenges, but the battle against discrimination remains one of the most difficult. Incidents like this remind us that we must do better, both as individuals and as institutions. Vanessa's tone softened slightly as she addressed the broader implications. This is not about vilifying one person. It's about recognizing the systems and attitudes that allow such incidents to occur. We need better training, stronger accountability, and a commitment to treating every person with respect, regardless of their race, gender, or appearance. The room erupted in applause, but Vanessa's expression remained solemn. She wasn't there for accolades. She was there to drive change. Later that week, the department announced a comprehensive reform plan. Mandatory bias training was instituted for all officers, along with stricter protocols for handling confrontations. Vanessa was invited to lead a series of workshops, sharing her experiences and offering insights on how to prevent similar incidents. Reluctantly, Charlie decided to attend one of the sessions. Sitting in the back of the room, he listened as Vanessa spoke, her words a mix of personal anecdotes and actionable advice. At the end of the session, as people filtered out, Charlie approached her hesitantly. Colonel Reynolds, he began, his voice uncertain. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. Vanessa regarded him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Acknowledging your mistakes is the first step, she said finally. But what matters most is what you do next. Charlie nodded, her words sinking in. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope, not for redemption, but for growth. Weeks had passed since the incident at Jefferson Park, but its impact rippled far beyond that quiet morning. The story of Colonel Vanessa Reynolds and Officer Charlie Edwards had become a national discussion. News outlets, social media, and community groups dissected the event, with opinions ranging from outrage to calls for reform. For Vanessa, the days following the press conference were a whirlwind. Invitations poured in, from military panels to civic organizations, asking her to speak about the incident and the broader issues it highlighted. While she appreciated the support, her focus remained clear, ensuring real, lasting change. At a follow-up press briefing, Vanessa addressed the media once more. This isn't about punishing one individual, she said firmly. It's about holding systems accountable and ensuring that those in positions of authority are equipped to serve with fairness and integrity. That's the only way to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Meanwhile, Charlie Edwards found himself at a crossroads. His dismissal from the Jefferson Police Department had left him reeling. For the first time in years, he was forced to confront the biases he had carried and the consequences of his actions. Initially, Charlie struggled with resentment, blaming everyone but himself. But as days turned into weeks, moments from the confrontation replayed in his mind. Vanessa's calm yet firm demeanor, her refusal to back down in the face of his aggression. Slowly, he began to realize the depth of his error. Seeking to make amends, Charlie enrolled in diversity and inclusion courses offered by a local nonprofit. The sessions were humbling, exposing him to perspectives and experiences he had never considered. One evening during a group discussion, a young Black woman shared a story eerily similar to Vanessa's. Her words struck a chord, forcing Charlie to acknowledge the harm his biases could inflict. Vanessa and Charlie's paths crossed again during a citywide event on public safety reform. Vanessa, as a keynote speaker, addressed a packed auditorium of law enforcement officers, civic leaders, and community members. Our shared goal, she emphasized, should be to build a culture of respect and accountability. Mistakes will happen, but what defines us is how we learn from them and strive to do better. At the end of her speech, Charlie approached her once more. This time, his demeanor was markedly different, humble, reflective, and earnest. "Colonel Reynolds," he began, his voice steady but low, "I wanted to thank you for what you said. It's made me think a lot about who I was and who I want to be." Vanessa studied him for a moment. "It's not easy to face your flaws," she said, "but change takes more than words. It's about consistent effort. Keep at it." Charlie nodded, her words resonating. Though he knew he couldn't undo the past, he was determined to build a better future. The incident led to tangible changes within the city. Under Mayor Walker's leadership, new initiatives were launched to address systemic bias, including mandatory training for all city employees and a task force dedicated to fostering community police relations. Vanessa played an active role in these efforts, using her platform to advocate for equity and justice. For Vanessa, the journey wasn't just about addressing one officer's behavior. It was about challenging the deep-seated prejudices that pervaded institutions. And while progress was slow, she found hope in the small victories. A conversation sparked, a mindset shifted, a policy revised. Months later, a letter arrived at Vanessa's office. It was from a young girl named Brianna, whose mother had seen Vanessa speak on television. "Dear Colonel Reynolds," it began, "my mom told me about how you stood up for yourself and didn't let anyone treat you unfairly. I want to be strong like you when I grow up. Thank you for showing me that girls like us can do anything." Vanessa smiled as she folded the letter. It was a simple gesture, but it reminded her why she fought so hard, not just for herself, but for those who would follow in her footsteps. The road ahead was long, but as Vanessa stepped out into the world, she carried with her a quiet determination. Every step forward, no matter how small, was a step toward a future where fairness and respect prevailed.